The grand hall of the luxurious hotel shimmered with golden light, crystal chandeliers reflecting over polished marble floors. Guests in elegant gowns and sharp suits mingled, sipping champagne and laughing softly. The atmosphere was refined, almost perfect, yet a faint tension hovered in the air. It was a charity gala, an event that promised sophistication, networking, and silent judgments of worth. The soft hum of conversation was occasionally punctuated by clinking glasses and the subtle strains of a string quartet in the background. Amid all this, she moved quietly, unnoticed by most. She was a young waitress dressed in a simple black uniform that marked her as a servant of the evening. Her hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her hands, calloused from long shifts, carried trays with careful precision. She had walked these halls countless times before, but tonight, there was a nervous flutter in her chest she couldn't quite explain. She had always been small in the world of the wealthy, moving among them like a shadow. No one paid attention to her unless she dropped a glass or accidentally brushed against a guest. That invisibility had its comforts, but tonight it left her exposed in ways she could not yet imagine. At the far end of the hall, he stood, a figure impossible to ignore. The billionaire, a man known not just for his wealth but for the intensity of his presence, scanned the room with sharp eyes. He was dressed in a tailored black suit, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. The guests who approached him found him polite, even charming, but there was an edge to his gaze, a sense that he measured everyone silently and precisely. Rumors had followed him through every city, whispers of power and influence, some admiring, some fearful. Tonight he seemed to search for something, or someone, and then his eyes landed on her. It was impossible to miss the moment, even for someone who usually remained invisible. The billionaire's gaze held an intensity that made her pause mid-step, the tray in her hand suddenly feeling heavier than it should. He studied her for a moment, and though no words were spoken, she felt a weight settle over her as if the entire room had focused on her alone. Her heart began to race. She tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself that she had carried trays heavier than her nerves tonight. She had dealt with difficult guests, demanding orders, and near disasters. Surely she could handle this too. Without warning, he moved toward her, his steps deliberate, commanding. The chatter of the room seemed to dim in her ears. When he reached her, he didn't smile, though his eyes held a spark of amusement or curiosity she could not read. He leaned slightly, his voice low but firm. "Play the piano, now." The word struck her like a physical blow. Play the piano? In this hall? In front of all these people? Her hands trembled, the tray almost slipping from her grasp. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. She had not played the piano in years, not since childhood, and certainly not in front of a crowd. Memories flooded her mind. Small lessons at a modest piano at home, the warmth of the keys under her fingers, the thrill of music flowing freely when no one watched. Those memories seemed distant, fragile, and she felt her confidence drain instantly. The billionaire's gaze did not waver. It was firm, almost daring. His hand gestured toward the grand piano at the center of the stage, a gleaming black instrument that reflected the crystal chandeliers. The room, it seemed, had collectively paused. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, glasses lowered, eyes turning toward the unfolding scene. She realized with a sinking feeling that all of them were watching, waiting. She swallowed hard, trying to summon courage she didn't feel. Her voice was barely a whisper. I can't." "You will," he said simply, the tone leaving no room for argument. He turned slightly, gesturing for the guests to continue their mingling, though it was clear no one moved. All attention was on her now. Her legs felt as if they had turned to stone. She took a hesitant step toward the piano, then another, the sound of her shoes clicking on the marble echoing in the hall. Every eye in the room seemed to follow her, and with each step, a sense of dread grew heavier in her chest. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and yet beneath that fear a tiny spark of something familiar stirred within her. She remembered the way her fingers used to fly over the keys, the way music had once been her voice when words failed. Could she still reach that place, she wondered? Could she reclaim that hidden part of herself? The audience whispered quietly, a low murmur of curiosity, doubt, and expectation. Some faces wore skepticism, some amusement, some genuine anticipation. She felt their judgment, their silent questioning, and it made her stomach twist. Yet as her hand hovered over the first key, a small surge of defiance began to build. She would not let fear paralyze her. She would try. Her fingers touched the piano keys lightly at first, almost hesitantly. The sound was soft, almost unsure, like a whisper. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the rhythm of her lessons, the flow of the notes, the music that had once filled her home. The sound grew steadier, more confident, but still faint. She was careful, testing herself, finding the courage to continue. The billionaire watched intently, his face still unreadable. She felt the weight of his scrutiny, the way he measured each movement, and it made her both nervous and determined. This was more than just a moment of performance. It was a challenge, a test of her inner strength. She wanted to prove, not to him, but to herself, that she could do it. Slowly, she began to play a simple melody, one she remembered from childhood. The music was soft, hesitant at first, but it carried a purity that caught the attention of the audience. Conversations had stopped entirely. The whispers faded. All eyes were on her, yet something inside her shifted. She felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration, the way a dancer might feel when taking a first leap into the air. As she continued, the sound grew richer, more confident. Her fingers found the keys naturally, her body moving with the rhythm she had once known so well. She forgot for a moment the intimidating figure in the suit, the crowded hall, the skeptical eyes. It was just her and the piano, and the music that flowed from her heart. A warmth spread through her chest, replacing the panic that had gripped her moments before. She glanced briefly at the billionaire. His expression remained calm, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a subtle acknowledgement of her skill. That small sign gave her courage. She pressed on, letting the music take over completely, losing herself in the notes and harmonies. The hall seemed to breathe with her, the crystal chandeliers shimmering as if they too were moved by the unfolding melody. Minutes passed, though it felt like seconds. Her hands danced over the keys, each note resonating with emotion, telling a story of fear, courage, and hidden talent. The guests were spellbound, drawn into the music in a way that no conversation or display of wealth could achieve. She felt the weight of the room lift slightly, replaced by a growing sense of connection, of shared experience and of wonder. When she finally paused, the hall was silent, the last note lingering in the air like a fragile promise. She opened her eyes, and the faces staring at her were no longer skeptical or mocking. They were surprised, amazed, some even touched to the point of quiet awe. The billionaire remained still, a faint smile touching his lips, a silent acknowledgement that she had met the challenge he had set. For the first time that evening, she felt seen, not as a waitress, not as a background figure, but as someone with a voice, with talent, with courage. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with exhilaration. The night, the hall, the grand piano, and even the billionaire himself had become a stage on which she had reclaimed a piece of herself long forgotten. The applause had not yet started when she felt her hands still hovering over the keys, trembling slightly. The moment was fleeting, but in it she sensed a small victory. She had survived the initial shock, the weight of a billionaire's command and the scrutiny of a room full of wealthy strangers. Yet, even as she stood there, an uneasy feeling crept into her chest. This was not over. The expectation had only grown heavier, and the audience waited, wondering if her brief attempt was enough or if it had been merely a fluke. She stepped back slightly from the piano, trying to catch her breath. Her mind raced, replaying every note she had just played. Could she continue? Could she find the strength to perform fully? To show them what she truly knew? Doubts like shadows tried to creep back in. She had learned music as a child, yes, but life had pushed her in different directions. Years of serving tables, rushing from kitchen to hall, had dulled the confidence she once had. Would it be enough now? In front of these people who could change her life with a single glance, a single judgment? The billionaire, still standing near the edge of the crowd, gave no indication of approval or disappointment. His expression was calm, almost calculating. He did not speak, but the weight of his presence was undeniable. She felt as if every decision, every hesitation was being measured, noted, and assessed. The silence he maintained was heavier than any words could have been. In that silence, she felt both fear and an odd spark of determination. Her mind wandered back to her childhood. She remembered a small living room in her family home, the upright piano in the corner, slightly worn but full of life. She remembered the hours she spent pressing keys, learning melodies by ear and composing her own small songs. She remembered the joy of creating sound, the way music had always understood her when no one else did. That memory, vivid and comforting, gave her a moment of courage. Perhaps she could do this. Perhaps she could find that girl inside herself again. A soft murmur spread through the room. Guests leaned slightly forward, curious. Some whispered guesses about what would happen next, their voices carrying a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. She realized that the first hesitant notes had piqued their attention. They were no longer simply watching a waitress. They were watching someone attempting something extraordinary. That realization gave her a strange sense of calm. If she could play, truly play, she could capture their attention and perhaps even respect. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the memory of her lessons and practice flood back. The initial fear began to melt into something else, a cautious hope. Slowly, she leaned forward, placing her fingers gently over the keys. She started again, this time with a simple melody, one she remembered from her earliest lessons. The sound was soft, almost fragile, but it was steady. Each note seemed to reassure her, a gentle reminder of what she was capable of. As she played, she became aware of small details she hadn't noticed before. The way the polished floor reflected the light, the faint scent of flowers in the air, the subtle movements of the audience as they settled in to listen. Every element of the room seemed to recede except for the piano and her connection to it. She felt the music moving through her, and with it the old confidence she had lost. The notes began to flow more freely, each one carrying a bit more assurance, a bit more grace. Yet doubt still lingered. She was aware of the billionaire still watching, still measuring, his expression unreadable. Part of her wanted to falter, to stop, to claim that she had done enough. But another part, deeper and stronger, refused. This was her moment, a rare chance to prove something to herself, something the world had not seen before. Her hands moved with increasing assurance, her mind focusing only on the music, letting go of fear. She remembered the small audience she had had in her childhood, family members, friends, neighbors who had listened politely and encouraged her. She imagined them here, silent but supportive, and it steadied her further. Music had always been her language when words failed, and now she realized it could be her shield and her voice in this unfamiliar, intimidating world. The melody became richer, smoother, flowing more naturally. Her fingers danced across the keys, sometimes pressing with gentle precision, sometimes striking boldly, letting emotion guide her. The audience responded without words. The skeptical whispers were gone. Eyes widened, some softened, some glistened with emotion. She could see the surprise in their expressions as they realized this was no ordinary performance. This was someone untrained for years, yes, but someone whose talent had never disappeared, someone who had been underestimated and was now quietly commanding their attention. It was a delicate, beautiful transformation that only she could feel in the intimate connection between music and listener. The billionaire leaned slightly forward, his arms crossed. Though his face remained mostly still, a subtle shift betrayed his interest, a faint acknowledgement that she was doing more than surviving. She was captivating. That realization sent a fresh wave of courage through her. She pressed on, letting the melody deepen, adding nuances she hadn't planned but which felt right, natural. It was as if her hands remembered what her mind had feared it had forgotten. The room held its collective breath. Every guest was caught in the spell of her playing, the ordinary waitress who had been commanded to approach the piano now becoming the center of something extraordinary. Some faces were open in wonder, some thoughtful, others quietly moved, undared speak, for fear of breaking the fragile magic in the air. She realized she had created a moment, small but powerful, that reached beyond the barriers of class, wealth, and expectation. Her own fear had not disappeared entirely, but it had transformed. It was now energy she could channel into her music. Each note was deliberate yet flowing, a balance of control and emotion. She began to feel joy again, the way she had when she first learned to play, that pure pleasure of creating something beautiful. The piano no longer felt like an instrument of pressure. It had become a partner, an extension of herself. Together they communicated something more than words could convey. Minutes passed, though she was not counting. She was lost in the music, lost in the moment, and in that loss, she discovered something vital. She could rise to the challenge, she could confront fear, and she could claim her hidden strength. The audience, too, seemed to sense it, their previous doubt giving way to admiration and quiet awe. The atmosphere shifted from tense anticipation to a shared, almost sacred silence that honored the courage of someone who had dared to stand tall despite the odds. She glanced once at the billionaire, And in that brief moment, their eyes met. There was no need for words. She saw recognition, perhaps surprise, and maybe even respect. It was a silent understanding that transcended the gap between employer and servant, wealth and humility, fear and talent. It was the acknowledgement of a human story unfolding, one that neither of them could have fully anticipated at the start of the evening. As she continued to play, a rhythm emerged, steady and strong. Her confidence grew with each passing measure. The music told a story of struggle, of hidden gifts, of determination and courage. It reached the ears and hearts of everyone in the hall, making them pause, reflect, and feel. The initial pressure she had felt transformed into a driving force, pushing her to play with skill and emotion, reminding her that she was capable of more than she had allowed herself to believe. In that moment, she realized that this was not just a performance for the audience. It was a personal triumph, a reclaiming of something she had feared lost. The years of serving others, of hiding in the background, had not erased her talent. Instead, they had made it stronger, more resilient and more meaningful. Every note carried that resilience, echoing through the hall and touching those who listened, even the billionaire who had orchestrated this unlikely challenge. By the time she finally paused, the room remained silent for a heartbeat, as if everyone collectively held their breath, savoring the resonance of the final chord. Then slowly, a ripple of quiet admiration began to spread through the guests. Eyes shone with surprise, smiles appeared, and a few discreet nods acknowledged the depth of what they had just witnessed. The power of her music had transformed the room, even if only briefly, and she felt a new sense of self emerging, steady and strong. She stepped back from the piano, breathing heavily but with a heart lighter than it had been in years. For the first time that evening, she felt truly seen, not just for her role as a waitress, but for her talent, courage, and humanity. She realized that this night, terrifying as it had been, had opened a door to possibilities she had never dared imagine. The music had spoken for her when words could not, and in that quiet, powerful moment, she understood that her life, her choices, and her hidden gifts could never be underestimated again. She stood there for a moment, hands still poised over the piano keys, feeling the echo of the last note in her chest. The room was quiet, the audience holding their breath as if waiting to see what would happen next. She realized that this was the true test, not the first hesitant notes, but the moment where she could transform fear into something remarkable. A deep breath steadied her trembling hands. She was ready to continue. As she began to play again, her fingers moved more confidently across the keys. Each note flowed into the next, forming a melody that was delicate yet purposeful. She let the music carry her, letting go of the thought of judgment, letting go of the fear that had weighed her down. Memories of her childhood lessons guided her movements, blending with the instinct that had never left her. She could feel the rhythm in her body, the music rising from her soul and spreading into the room. The audience, initially skeptical, leaned in closer. Some guests whispered to each other, but their words were soft, hesitant, unsure of how to react to the surprising skill they were witnessing. Others simply sat or stood quietly, their eyes fixed on her hands, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and awe. She noticed one older gentleman whose eyes softened, and she wondered what he might be thinking. Perhaps he too had once experienced the quiet triumph of hidden talent. Perhaps he understood the courage it took to stand before strangers and risk everything. Her mind wandered back to the path that had led her here. Life had not been easy. She had grown up in a modest home, where money was always scarce and opportunities were limited. She had discovered the piano as a child, an escape from the noise of the world, a place where she could be herself. She remembered the hours spent learning songs from worn-out music books, the pride in her mother's smile when she played something new, and the quiet satisfaction of mastering a difficult piece. But as life grew more complicated with responsibilities and hardships, the piano had been put aside. Dreams had been postponed and talent buried under the weight of survival. Yet tonight, those years of sacrifice and obscurity felt like preparation rather than loss. Every challenge, every long shift, every moment of doubt had led her to this point. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge between her past and present, between fear and courage. Each note she played now carried the weight of her journey, the story of someone who had persevered despite everything. The billionaire watched silently, his expression unreadable, but his eyes focused intently on her. She felt the pressure of his gaze, but rather than feeling overwhelmed, she felt driven. It was as if his expectation had unlocked something inside her, a determination to prove not to him but to herself that she was capable of more than anyone, including herself, had believed. The melody grew richer, more complex. She began to add small flourishes, improvisations she hadn't planned but which felt natural, as if the music itself was guiding her fingers. The hall seemed to respond to her, the polished floors reflecting the light in a way that made the piano glow. The chandeliers sparkled like stars, and she felt a connection not just to the room, but to the moment itself, to the energy that had gathered around her. Her thoughts wandered again, this time to the guests themselves. She imagined their lives, their struggles, their triumphs and failures. Perhaps some had never taken risks, never faced a challenge that required their heart to speak. She realized that in playing, she was giving them a gift, not just entertainment, but a reminder of courage, of the beauty that can emerge when someone dares to step into the unknown. Her music was no longer just for her, it belonged to everyone in the room. A soft smile touched her lips as she continued. The initial fear that had gripped her chest had transformed into a strange exhilaration. Her fingers danced across the keys with increasing freedom, the melody taking on emotional depth she hadn't expected. The music was now a dialogue between her and the audience, a conversation without words, a shared experience that bridged differences of class, age, and wealth. She noticed subtle reactions among the crowd. Some guests shifted in their seats, captivated by the unexpected talent before them. Others covered their mouths in astonishment, unable to hide their amazement. A few exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the power of the performance. Even those who had initially been dismissive seemed caught in the spell of her music, their skepticism replaced by admiration. The billionaire leaned slightly forward, his arms crossed, his posture still as commanding as ever. Yet there was a flicker in his eyes, a small shift that betrayed his interest, perhaps even his respect. She felt a quiet satisfaction, not from the recognition itself, but from the realization that she was fully in control of her abilities. She was no longer the nervous waitress who had hesitated. She was a musician, commanding the attention of an audience that had underestimated her. As the melody progressed, she allowed herself to experiment further. She added subtle pauses, letting the notes linger in the air, creating tension and anticipation. She varied the dynamics, softening some passages to draw listeners in, then building intensity to evoke emotion. Each choice was instinctive, guided by the music and the energy in the room. She felt a profound sense of creativity, a joy she had not experienced in years, as if the piano had become an extension of her own voice. Her mind briefly considered the possibility of failure, the thought that perhaps someone would judge her harshly or dismiss her talent, but she pushed it aside. The fear that had once been paralyzing had become fuel, driving her to play with authenticity and passion. She realized that the audience's expectations, while intimidating, could not define her worth. Only her own courage and skill mattered, and she was determined to give everything she had. The music reached a turning point. She transitioned into a more complex section, her fingers moving quickly yet precisely. The melody was now bold, expressive, and filled with emotion. The room responded subtly, the silence deepening as if every listener was holding their breath, absorbed in the unfolding performance. She felt a connection with each person in the hall, a shared understanding that transcended the differences between them. In that moment, music had become a unifying force, a bridge between disparate lives. Her thoughts drifted once more, this time to the concept of opportunity. How often had life presented moments like this? Rare chances that demanded courage and conviction. She realized that she had spent too long waiting for permission, for recognition, for validation from others. Tonight she had taken the initiative, stepped into the spotlight, and discovered that her abilities were real and powerful. The experience was liberating, and she felt a new sense of confidence emerging. As she played, she noticed subtle changes in the audience's demeanor. Some guests had their eyes closed, completely absorbed in the music. Others leaned forward, unable to look away. A few whispered quietly to each other, but their tone was one of admiration, not skepticism. She felt a sense of pride, not in the attention itself, but in the knowledge that she had touched people in a meaningful way. The billionaire's gaze remained fixed on her, unwavering, yet not threatening. There was an intensity in his observation that could have been intimidating, but she had learned to channel that energy into her performance. She felt a silent challenge in his eyes, a test of skill and composure, and she met it with determination. Each note she played was a response, a demonstration of her capability, and a statement of her resilience. Time seemed to stretch and contract as she continued to play. Minutes passed like seconds, and seconds felt like minutes. She was lost in the music, fully immersed in the creative flow. The piano keys no longer felt like obstacles or instruments. They were conduits for her expression, extensions of her thoughts and emotions. The room faded into the background, leaving only the sound, the feeling, and the connection between her and the listeners. She allowed herself a small smile, feeling a mixture of relief and exhilaration. The initial fear, the nervous anticipation, and the weight of expectation had transformed into a sense of empowerment. She was no longer merely reacting. She was actively shaping the experience, guiding the audience through a journey of melody and emotion. Each note carried intention, each pause held meaning, and each flourish revealed a depth of talent she had long kept hidden. The audience's response grew more apparent. Hands that had been still now twitched with the urge to applaud, eyes widened in amazement, and subtle nods acknowledged her skill. Even the quietest observers seemed captivated, drawn into the narrative she had created through music. She felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not from external validation, but from the realization that she had reclaimed a part of herself that had been dormant for too long. The billionaire finally allowed a slight nod, a gesture of recognition and perhaps approval. She felt a quiet satisfaction, understanding that this moment was as much about her personal triumph as it was about impressing others. She had faced fear, embraced her talent, and emerged stronger and more confident. The performance was no longer about pleasing an audience. It was about asserting her identity, her capability, and her courage. She continued to play, weaving the melody into a rich tapestry of emotion and expression. The music conveyed joy, sorrow, determination, and hope, capturing the complexity of human experience. Each note was deliberate yet infused with spontaneity, reflecting the interplay between skill and instinct. She felt a sense of liberation, as if the piano had unlocked not only her talent but also her inner strength and resilience. As the final section approached, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of the moment. The audience was completely engaged, the room silent except for the resonant sound of the piano. She played with a sense of purpose, each chord a declaration of her journey, each arpeggio a testament to her perseverance. She realized that the music was no longer just an instrument of performance. It was a vehicle for transformation, both for herself and for those who listened. When she reached the final notes, she played them with confidence and grace, allowing them to linger in the air. The silence that followed was profound, a shared acknowledgement of the power and beauty of what had just occurred. She opened her eyes, taking in the expressions of the audience. There was awe, admiration, and a quiet respect that had not been present at the beginning of the evening. She had not only survived the challenge, she had transformed it into something extraordinary. Breathing heavily but with a sense of accomplishment, she leaned back slightly from the piano. The room seemed to exhale with her, a collective recognition of the courage and skill she had displayed. The initial tension, the fear, and the uncertainty had given way to a powerful sense of achievement. She realized that this night, this moment, had changed her forever, opening doors she had never imagined and revealing the depth of her own potential. The room was completely silent, a silence so profound it seemed to absorb even the soft hum of the air conditioning. Guests who had been chatting just moments ago were now completely absorbed in the performance. Every eye was on her, the young waitress who had been summoned to the piano by a billionaire and who now held the room in her hands. She could feel their attention, a mix of curiosity, doubt, and growing admiration, pressing on her from all sides. Yet in that pressure she found something unexpected, a calm determination that seemed to flow from the music itself. She took a deep breath and let her fingers dance over the keys. The melody she had chosen was simple at first, a tune from her childhood, but as the music began to rise, it took on a life of its own. Each note seemed to carry a fragment of her journey, the years of hard work, the small victories, the quiet moments of joy and struggle. Her hands moved with a grace and confidence that surprised even her. It was as if the piano remembered her, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment to bring out the best in her. The audience felt it too. The skeptics leaned forward, their previous doubt replaced by fascination. Those who had quietly observed with polite interest now leaned in, almost instinctively drawn into the spell she had cast. Eyes that had been cold or indifferent now glimmered with admiration. There was an unspoken understanding forming in the room. They were witnessing something rare and beautiful, a talent that had been hidden away for too long, now shining in its full brilliance. The billionaire remained a silent figure at the edge of the room, his presence commanding, yet his expression was shifting. The critical edge he had carried earlier had softened into something more nuanced, a mix of respect and curiosity. He watched as she transformed fear into power, hesitation into mastery, and invisibility into undeniable presence. There was no need for words. The performance spoke for itself, and it spoke volumes. She remembered her childhood piano, the one in the small, modest living room of her home. She remembered the hours spent learning, the small triumphs when she mastered a difficult piece, and the quiet pride in her parents' eyes. She remembered the music itself, how it had always been a refuge, a place where she could express emotions too complex for words. Those memories gave her strength now, as if every note she played was rooted in the foundation of her past, grounding her even in the most intense moments of the present. As the melody grew, she allowed herself to take risks, to explore beyond the familiar. She added subtle flourishes, delicate runs, and gentle pauses that created a dialogue between the piano and the audience. Each chord was deliberate yet fluid, conveying a story that only music could tell. She felt herself moving in harmony with the room, the energy of the guests feeding into her performance, and in turn, the music reaching them in ways that transcended language. Her heart was pounding, not with fear, but with exhilaration. She was fully present, fully alive in the music. The fear that had initially gripped her chest had transformed into a driving force, pushing her to express herself in ways she had never attempted before. Each note was infused with her courage, each pause a testament to her composure, each flourish a statement of her newfound confidence. She realized that this was more than a performance. It was a declaration, a reclaiming of her voice in a world that had long ignored her. The audience was reacting in subtle but powerful ways. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, feeling the emotion and skill in each phrase. Others leaned forward, their attention fully captured, caught between disbelief and admiration. A few exchanged whispered comments, their voices tinged with awe and surprise. Even those who had been most skeptical at the start of the evening could no longer deny the talent and emotion she conveyed through every note. The billionaire's expression shifted further. The calm, measured observation had evolved into an almost tangible recognition. He was witnessing more than just skill. He was witnessing transformation, both in the performer and in the room itself. The music had changed the atmosphere, turning what had been a formal, somewhat intimidating gathering into an intimate space where human emotion and talent were celebrated above all else. There was a quiet respect forming in his eyes, a recognition that she had risen to the challenge in a way that few could have anticipated. She felt herself moving deeper into the performance, letting instinct and emotion guide her fingers. The music became a dialogue, not just with the audience, but with herself, with the years of experiences that had led her here. She played with intensity and delicacy, blending technical skill with emotional depth. Each passage told a part of her story, the struggles and triumphs of someone who had lived a life of hard work and quiet determination. She felt a sense of freedom she had not known in years, a liberation that came from embracing her talent fully and unapologetically. The melody swelled, filling the room with rich, resonant sound. She allowed herself to move with the rhythm, leaning slightly into the piano, letting her body convey what her fingers played. The audience could feel the emotion behind every note, the dedication and passion that had been poured into this performance. There was a sense of intimacy in the hall, a shared experience that connected everyone present, from the youngest guest to the billionaire himself. She remembered the moments of doubt that had plagued her earlier in the evening, the hesitation and fear that had made her question whether she could rise to the challenge. She realized now that those moments had been necessary, that without them she would not have discovered the depth of her own courage and resilience. The fear had pushed her to focus, to connect with the music, and to find a strength she had long forgotten. It had become a catalyst, transforming nervous energy into artistry and confidence. As she continued, the music became more complex, weaving together different themes and emotions. She allowed herself to explore contrasts, Soft, tender passages followed by bold, dramatic chords. Quiet moments of reflection punctuated by bursts of energy and movement. Each transition was intentional, a way to communicate not just through notes but through feeling, creating a narrative that was both personal and universal. She felt the story of her life unfolding through the piano, each phrase a reflection of her journey. The audience remained rapt, captivated by the evolution of the performance. Some were visibly moved, their expressions softening as they listened. Others leaned in, unable to look away, caught in the tension and release of the music. The room itself seemed to breathe with her, the chandeliers casting gentle reflections across the piano and the polished floors. Every detail of the environment became part of the experience, enhancing the connection between performer and audience. The billionaire's gaze remained fixed on her, but it was no longer critical or challenging. There was a quiet admiration there, an acknowledgement of the skill, courage, and emotion she had brought to the piano. He understood, perhaps better than anyone in the room, the significance of this moment, the transformation of a timid waitress into a commanding presence, a performer who had silenced doubt and captivated a room of strangers. There was respect in his eyes, the kind that comes from witnessing someone exceed expectations and rise above limitations. She felt a surge of pride and fulfillment. This was more than a performance. It was a declaration of identity and resilience. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and the weight of expectations, and she had emerged not just intact but stronger and more confident. The music was no longer just notes on a page. It was an expression of her soul, a testament to the power of courage and determination. She realized that this moment would stay with her forever. A turning point in her life where talent and bravery had converged to create something extraordinary. The final section of the piece approached, and she allowed herself to play with even greater freedom. The melody became a crescendo of emotion, a sweeping expression of everything she had felt and experienced. Her fingers moved with precision and fluidity, each note carrying intention and depth. She felt fully immersed in the music, fully connected to the audience, and fully aware of the impact her performance was having. The hall was silent, every ear tuned to the sound of the piano, every heart moved by the story she was telling. As she struck the final chord, she let it resonate fully, allowing the sound to linger in the air. The room seemed to hold its breath for a moment longer, savoring the conclusion of the performance. Then slowly a ripple of admiration and astonishment spread through the audience. Some clapped quietly, others gasped softly, and a few wiped away tears. The atmosphere had shifted completely, from formal expectation to genuine awe and appreciation. She had transformed the room, and in doing so had transformed herself. She leaned back from the piano, breathing heavily but with a sense of accomplishment and liberation. The weight of fear and uncertainty had been replaced by pride, confidence, and a deep connection to her own talent. The audience, once skeptical, now looked upon her with admiration and respect. The billionaire, too, allowed himself a small, approving smile, a silent acknowledgement of the courage and skill she had displayed. It was a moment of recognition, not just of her performance, but of her resilience and determination. In that moment, she realized the full significance of what had happened. She had faced a challenge that had seemed impossible, stood in front of a room full of strangers who held power and influence, and had emerged victorious not through luck, but through talent, courage, and authenticity. The music had become a bridge, connecting her to the audience, the billionaire, and most importantly, to herself. It was a declaration that she was capable, strong, and deserving of recognition, and it was a message that no one could take away. The final chord lingered in the hall, fading slowly into a profound silence that felt heavier than words. The audience, frozen for a heartbeat, was suspended between disbelief and awe. She stood with her hands hovering over the piano keys, feeling the echo of the last note vibrate through her fingers and into her chest. Her heart pounded not with fear now, but with exhilaration and an almost trembling relief. She had done it. She had faced the challenge that had seemed impossible, played her heart, and captivated everyone in the room. Then, like the release of held breath, the room erupted. Applause started softly at first, hesitantly, then grew into a wave that filled the grand hall. People were on their feet, some cheering, some clapping, and some wiping tears from their eyes. The sound was overwhelming yet sweet, a recognition of the courage and talent she had displayed. She could barely process it, her own surprise mingling with pride. This was a moment that would change everything, and she felt it deep within herself. The billionaire approached quietly, a calm figure among the tumult of admiration. His steps were deliberate, measured, yet there was a subtle energy in his presence that demanded attention. He stopped beside her, looking down at her with an intensity that was now tempered with respect. There was no longer the earlier coldness or challenge. Instead, there was acknowledgement, recognition, and a hint of admiration. She could see it in his eyes, though he said nothing at first, letting the music and applause speak for her achievements. "That was remarkable," he finally said, his voice low but steady. It carried weight not just in volume but in meaning. Those words, simple as they were, held the approval she had unconsciously sought from him. She nodded, too breathless to speak, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief washing over her. It was rare for someone like him to offer such praise, and even rarer to do so sincerely. Yet she felt it was genuine, and that made the moment all the more powerful. Around her, the audience continued to react, some approaching her to offer kind words, others simply staring in admiration. People she had served just moments ago who had barely noticed her were now acknowledging her talent openly, some even with awe in their voices. The shift was tangible. The room that had moments ago been filled with polite expectation was now alive with respect and appreciation for her courage and skill. She realized in a quiet moment of clarity that she had redefined how they saw her, not as a waitress, not as someone in the background, but as a person with extraordinary talent and inner strength. As the applause settled into murmurs of admiration and excitement, the billionaire gestured for her to follow him to a quieter part of the hall. She complied, her movement still slightly shaky, but her head held high. He led her to a corner where the noise of the audience was distant but still present, a reminder of the impact she had made. "There," he finally spoke again, this time with more deliberation. "You have something rare," he said, his eyes fixed on hers. "Not just talent, but courage. Many people have skill, many people have training, but very few can rise to the occasion like you just did. Most would have turned away, but you faced it head on. That makes all the difference." She felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. For years, she had doubted herself, had questioned her abilities, and had hidden her talent behind the routine of daily life. Now in this moment, she understood that courage and perseverance were just as important as skill. The recognition from someone so influential only amplified the realization that she had more potential than she had ever allowed herself to believe. "I didn't think I could do it," she admitted softly, the confession more to herself than to him. "I was terrified." He nodded, as if acknowledging a truth he had long known. "Fear is natural. The important thing is what you do with it. You turned fear into strength. You let it guide you rather than control you. That's what makes you exceptional." She felt the weight of those words, the truth in them, and the way they resonated with her own experience. It wasn't just the applause or the attention that mattered. It was the realization that she could face challenges, rise above doubt, and reveal her true self when the moment demanded it. For the first time, she felt fully seen, not just for her talent, but for the courage and resilience that had carried her through life's obstacles. The billionaire paused, looking around the hall where the guests were now talking in hushed tones, still buzzing with the aftermath of her performance. Then he turned back to her with a small smile. "I believe this is just the beginning for you. Talent like yours should be nurtured, not hidden away. You deserve opportunities that match your skill. I want to help with that if you'll let me." Her eyes widened in surprise. Help? Opportunity? She had never imagined that one evening, one performance could open doors in such a dramatic way. Her mind raced with possibilities. The path ahead suddenly filled with options she had never considered. The thought of mentorship, training, or sponsorship from someone with his influence was dizzying, yet exhilarating. She felt a surge of gratitude and cautious hope. This could change her life entirely. I don't know what to say," she managed, her voice trembling slightly. "I never expected anything like this." He shook his head gently. "You don't need to say anything now. Just remember what you just did. Remember the courage it took. That will carry you forward. I'll take care of the rest." For the first time in her life, she felt the possibility of a future unbound by limitations. The routine of serving tables, the quiet invisibility, the self-doubt, all of it seemed to fade, replaced by a sense of potential and purpose. She realized that her talent had been waiting for this moment, for someone to recognize it and for her to step forward. The piano had been her bridge. and now it had led her to opportunities she had only dreamed of. As she stood there, processing the whirlwind of the evening, she noticed the small details that had escaped her earlier, the subtle smiles of the guests who had come to admire her, the way the piano gleamed under the lights, the quiet hum of conversation filled with newfound appreciation. Each detail was a reminder that she had not only performed music, she had touched lives, altered perceptions, and claimed her place in a world that had overlooked her. The billionaire gave her a final nod and walked back toward the crowd, leaving her with a sense of quiet accomplishment and empowerment. She remained by the piano for a moment longer, letting the experience settle within her. The music, the fear, the courage, the applause, all of it had culminated in this transformative night. She felt a new confidence in herself, a sense that she could face challenges, embrace opportunities, and rise to meet expectations that once seemed impossible. The guests gradually began to disperse, still buzzing with conversation about the extraordinary performance they had witnessed. Some approached her to express admiration directly. Others simply gave quiet nods or smiles as they passed. Each interaction reinforced the realization that she had made an impact, that her music had resonated deeply, and that she had earned a place of respect and recognition that would not be forgotten. She took one last look at the piano, her fingers brushing lightly over the keys. It had been the instrument of her courage, the medium through which she had expressed herself and the bridge to a new chapter in her life. She realized that the piano would always hold a special place in her journey, not just as an object, but as a symbol of the strength, resilience, and talent that defined her. As she left the hall, walking through the corridors of the hotel, she felt a sense of lightness and possibility she had never known. The night had begun with fear and uncertainty, with a command that had seemed impossible to fulfill. Yet through courage, skill, and authenticity, she had transformed fear into triumph, invisibility into recognition, and doubt into empowerment. The experience had changed her, showing her that she was capable of far more than she had ever imagined. She stepped out into the cool night air, taking a deep breath, feeling the world open up around her. The city lights reflected possibilities, and she understood that this was not just a fleeting moment of success. It was the start of a new path, one in which her talent and courage would continue to carry her forward. She had faced a challenge, conquered it, and discovered the depth of her own strength. And in doing so, she had also inspired everyone who had witnessed her, leaving an impression that would linger far beyond the walls of the Grand Hall. Her thoughts returned to the music, to the sensation of the keys beneath her fingers, the way the notes had resonated not just in the room but within her. She realized that the performance had been more than an act. It had been a statement, a declaration of who she was and what she was capable of. The applause, the recognition, the opportunity offered by the billionaire, all of it was validation, yes, but also a reminder that courage and authenticity were what truly define